out of nowhere, guys on horses, and I'm not joking, they were swinging lassos over their head, came straight towards them. And you have to hear Joe Latore tell the story. He tells it way better than I do. But as he tells it, he figured this was the end. Here he is, a Puerto Rican guy out in the hills of West Virginia, miles out into the woods, and there's guys coming towards him with lassos. He just figured, all right, well, this is it. And so you can imagine his relief when these guys went right past him and went after some cows that they hadn't noticed, some stray cows that were actually out there in the woods. The point is, he had people that were coming towards him, and he wasn't exactly sure what their intentions were. And I don't know, maybe another similar experience would be every once in a while, I don't do it a lot, but I might go jogging here in the neighborhood. And here in this neighborhood, this isn't a neighborhood that there's a whole lot of people jogging out in normally. And so I've kind of learned that when you're out and you realize you're coming up behind someone, I try to make a little noise, maybe with my feet or something, because I've had some times where people don't realize you're out there and all of a sudden they see someone running towards them and they think you're running at them. And you get a terrified look of, wait, is this someone who's about to like tackle me? And so you kind of learn, make sure you give people a little awareness that you're behind them and that you're coming up on them and that your intentions are good. You're just out for a run. But the point is, when someone's coming towards us, they can be coming towards us to help us, or they can be coming towards us to harm us. But we want to know which one it is. And as we saw last time here in Habakkuk chapter 3, the king is coming. The king of all creation is stepping down out of heaven to come to this earth. And this king is, as Habakkuk has this vision, is moving towards Habakkuk. Remember that Habakkuk had gotten the news back in chapter 1 that the Babylonians, this foreign country, was going to be invading his country. And God's people, Habakkuk's own country, was going to be defeated and carried away into captivity. And so it seemed like the end of the world to Habakkuk. It seemed like, well, this was it. And he doesn't understand any of it, but he goes to God to ask him about it. And what God tells him here in chapter 3 is, I'll show you the real end of the world. Judgment is coming on Israel. Judgment is coming on the Babylonians. But all of that is just a sneak preview for the judgment that comes at the end of the world. We saw last time that this king is coming. In verse 4, his radiance is like the sunlight. He has rays flashing from his hand. He measures the earth because he made it and owns it. He can just look and nations are startled, or mountains will crumble. So the most permanent, indestructible things, even in nature, can't stand up against the eternal plans of God. So Habakkuk sees the coming Babylonians, but now he sees that the king is coming. But the question is, who is he coming for? As he moves toward Habakkuk, what are his intentions? Is it good or bad that God is coming towards him? So let's look at our text and see what this king is coming for. He says in verse 7, I saw the tents of Cushan under distress. The tent curtains of the land of Midian were trembling. You notice as we go through this text that this is a personal vision that Habakkuk saw. He says, I saw it, and he's going to address God as you. And so you'll see that as we go through this. But he talks about the tents of Cushan and the land of Midian. There's a little bit of debate among scholars exactly what these two references are, because there's different Midianites and different people from Cushan in different places and in different parts of history. Most likely what it's talking about is two other invaders of Israel at other times. In Judges chapter 3, the very first people that invade the land of Israel are from Cushan. And then you remember it was the Midianites that Gideon went out against. The Midianites came with that huge, massive army that there was no way they could beat. And so it seems like what God is saying here is these other massive invading forces they're trembling and pushed to the background as this king comes onto the stage. And this focus in these next few verses is on the coming king and his creation. It says in verse 8, did the Lord rage against the rivers, or was your anger or was your anger, or your wrath against the sea, that you rode on your horses, on your chariots of salvation? Your bow was made bare, the rods of chastisement were sworn. So God is over these things. These rivers and seas can't stop God from what he's going to do. Normally, in a military situation, the ocean or the river is a great barrier. If you're worried about an invading force, if you have a river or you have a massive ocean, the army that's attacking you has to come over it. But in God's case, he's the one who made the river, he made the ocean. So he steps across it with such domination that the author asks, is this what you're angry at? Because he just breaks through the rivers and through the seas so quickly. Of course, we've seen this in the past, right? When the Egyptians thought they had the Israelites cornered because they couldn't get through the Red Sea. But God just parts the river. He does it 2 other times, like in the land of Jordan, when he opens them up for them to walk through. But the point is that nothing can stand in the way of God. He's pictured here coming with horses on a chariot of salvation. His bow is out and ready. And this king that's coming towards us is a warrior king. We saw a few verses earlier that God was actually veiling some of his power, that he had his own hand in front of himself to veil his power. But here his power is being unleashed. His bow is out, he's on his chariot, and he's coming towards us. And not only is he more powerful than anything in creation, that nothing in creation can stop him, but he's actually using creation as well. Look at the next few verses. It says, you cleaved the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and quaked. The downpour of waters swept by. The deep uttered forth its voice. It lifted high its hands. Sun and moon stood in their places. They went away at the light of your arrows, at the radiance of your gleaming spear. In indignation, you marched through the earth. In anger, you trampled the nations. So it's not just the bow that this king has, this warrior king that's coming has. He has all of creation at his disposal. It's a picture of a massive thunderstorm that would put so much water on the ground that the water would break through the land. This word for deep is the same word in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, where it's the waters that covered the earth before creation. It's the word for the massive ocean. And all of this is under the complete control of the king. It's peaking waves. It says its hands are lifted up poetically. These massive waves, that if you were at the shore or you were out in the ocean and a massive wave comes, it scares us. It's a terror to us. But they are nothing but raising their hands in surrender to God. Even the sun and the moon stand still. Again, the most fixed, immovable parts of creation. The things that as human beings, we couldn't have anything to do with. We can't make the sun stop rotating, or the sun stop rotating around the earth, or the earth stop rotating around the sun. You can't make it stop. You can't do anything about it. It's immovable, it's fixed. But God is more powerful even than those things. And again, with all these things, we've gotten glimpses all throughout Scripture of God having this kind of power. In the flood with Noah, the crossing of the Red Sea, and when God stopped the sun for the battle that Joshua was fighting. God's people have always believed that God has this kind of power, and we always do. But what we often forget is that is only a taste of what's to come. That when God comes in final judgment, this kind of power is going to be seen again on the earth. So remember earlier, Habakkuk had asked, was God angry at the rivers and at the ocean? And here we start to see why God was coming down. It says, in indignation you marched through the earth. In anger you trampled the nations. This word for trample is the word for threshing. It's where they would take a mule or an ox in a small little box and let it just walk around to crush the wheat to get the kernel separated from the chaff. It has this idea of something that would just be pounded and grounded to dust. And that's what God is coming to do to the nations. This warrior king is not coming against his creation. He's coming with his creation, and he is coming to punish the nations. He's angry, and he is coming to punish those who have rebelled against him. But our text still hasn't told us who he's coming for. As we put ourselves in Habakkuk's shoes, and he sees this vision of God at the end of time stepping down onto the earth as a warrior. He's coming with bows and spears. He's coming with all of creation, and he's angry. Does God come and just punish everyone? Is God coming to just punish indiscriminately and there's nothing that we can do? But why is this king coming? The next verse says why. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. Brothers and sisters, this warrior king is coming, but he's coming for you. He is on a rescue mission. He is coming for revenge on his enemies. He is coming to reveal himself, but part of why he is coming to rescue his people. What we have been witnessing in Habakkuk chapter 3 is the final rescue mission of God for his people. It says it repeats it purposely to emphasize it, for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed one. The anointed is repeatedly referred to in Scripture, how God's people are marked out. We would say in the New Testament that if you have trusted in Christ, you've turned away from your sin, then you are his child. You've been anointed. We would, again, in the New Testament, that anointing comes through the Holy Spirit. When you turn away from your sin, you trust in Christ, you are marked out as one of God's people. And when he comes in all of his power and majesty, he's coming for you if you are his child. He's coming to save you. He's coming to finish what he started on the cross when he redeemed you. He's coming to crush every one of his enemies. And we see here in these verses, Habakkuk's prayer from verse 2 has been answered when he asked God, in wrath, remember mercy. And here we have God stepping down onto this planet, and he does. In mercy, in his wrath, he still remembers his mercy. I think the closest thing that I can get to picturing this would come from something that happened to me about 10 or 11 years ago. A lot of you know this story. Me and Bill Smith were outside of a Wawa after a Sunday, and we got jumped by 3 guys. And after some lady, as it was happening, had her car hop up over the curb and was honking and yelling at them, so they ran away. And my first instinct was to call 911. So I had my cell phone, I pulled it out, and I was bleeding a little bit from where I'd gotten punched. And when I told them that I was bleeding and that I'd been attacked, apparently that escalated the call. And before long, police cars were coming from every direction. I can just remember the feeling at Ellen Erie as all of these police cars whizzed in from different directions with their lights on, because they were coming there to help me. They were coming with the ability and the authority to help me at a time when I needed help. And that was an amazing feeling to know that there were people out there who could help me, and they ended up catching those guys a few blocks away. But the point is, they were coming for me. We've all seen police cars here in the city. You've seen police cars go whizzing past with their lights on. It didn't mean that much to you, but it's different when they're coming to help you. And if you can see where, if in that moment I was comforted in that small way, how much of a comfort is it that this king is coming for us? This warrior king, who has all authority and all power, is coming, and he's on our side. He's coming for us to rescue us. Do you believe that God is coming for you? This king, with so much beauty and so much power, do you believe that he's on your side? I think it's interesting today that one of the kind of common phrases that you'll hear in relationships, whether that's with friends or sometimes between with a spouse, someone will say, I want someone who will fight for me, right? We desperately know that we need someone on our side in life's battles. But when we understand the truth of Scripture, we understand the fact that the most powerful being in the universe, because of Christ, is now on our side. He is coming for us. Remember what it says in Romans chapter 8? What do we say to these things? If God is for us, who is against us? We experience all sorts of different kinds of defeat in life, right? Just like Habakkuk has been experiencing defeat, and he has already been told by God more defeat is coming at the hands of the Babylonians. But we experience defeat in this life. Defeat from other people who treat us wrong. Defeat by death, defeat by persecution. But every single one of those defeats is measured in the light of this victory, because the King is coming to save us. The ultimate victory has been assured for us. Remember, I mentioned this last time, what Martin Luther said, that there's 2 days on my calendar, this day and that day. That day when God comes for his own. That's the day we're living for as Christians. That's the day we're waiting for as Christians. That's the day we're hoping for as Christians. Everything hangs for us on that day. And this text is describing that day when the warrior king steps down onto this planet, and he's coming for us. He's coming against his enemies, but he's coming for us if we are his children. So let's just notice 2 things about what this final conflict looks like when the warrior king comes. First of all, notice that this is a complete victory. Habakkuk says, talking about God, you struck the head of the house of evil to lay him open from thigh to neck. You pierced with his own spears, the head of his throngs. They stormed in to scatter us. Their exaltation was like those who devour the oppressed in secret. You trampled on the sea with your horses, on the surge of many waters. What Habakkuk describes here is a complete victory. The outcome is never in doubt. There really is no struggle because the king wins it decisively. The leader of this rebellion is destroyed. It's actually kind of a graphic picture of someone who is split basically wide open from their thigh to their head and is completely defeated. The leader, of course, would be any wicked leader that has hated God and persecuted God's people. I think the imagery here really makes us think, when it's talking about the head of the house of evil, that it's ultimately talking about Satan himself. Remember that God promised in Genesis chapter 3 somebody who would come and crush the head of the serpent. And here's another promise in Scripture that the head of the house of evil, that Satan, is ultimately defeated. But notice here, too, that it's not just the leader of the wickedness that's destroyed. It's everyone that's on his side. The army and the leaders of their army are destroyed. They think, just like the Babylonians thought, that they would be on the winning side and that they could come in and win this battle easily, that they could basically, like, this was easy pickings, this was easy prey to come and drag away these followers of God. But instead, they are the ones who are defeated. They thought that this would be a battle that they could possibly win, but instead, they lose. It's really interesting that it says here that God destroys them with his own spears. That God actually takes the instruments that they are planning to use against him, and that's what he uses to defeat them. We saw, remember in Habakkuk chapter 2, that part of the horror of sin is that you get what you deserve. You get exactly what you've been doing to other people. And here in this text, it's more of that decisive, you could almost say a humiliating punishment. Because God takes the weapons that were meant to challenge God, and he actually uses those exact same things to defeat them. If you think about it, there's a theme of this whole idea in Scripture. Remember, Haman had gallows built to hang Mordecai on, and then Haman was the one who ended up on them. Remember, the enemies of Daniel thought that they were really smart and that they were going to get him thrown into the lion's den, which he did, but the lions didn't eat him. And then they were the ones that got thrown into the lion's den and eaten. Psalm 7 talks about the wicked digging a trap for others, but they're the ones who fall into it. And then, of course, ultimately, it's Jesus' death on the cross that kills death. Death itself is defeated by death. One commentator said made an interesting point of how this is a blessing to us. He says, God's people ought to rest confidently in the assurance that the strength of the enemy's power only displays their capacity to destroy themselves. The strength of the enemy's power only displays their capacity to destroy themselves. So the strength of the wicked is ultimately their own downfall. And today, we still look at the power of wicked people, wicked nations, wicked systems, and we have a tendency to be scared. We have a tendency to think and worry about them, of how could this happen? What's going to happen if they keep on going this way? But the strength of God's enemies only means that their doom is more certain. Like the kids used to say, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, right? And as Christians, we ultimately have nothing to fear. Let me just stop right here and say one other thing. And again, I guess this is kind of an obvious thing, but there are only two sides to this battle, right? There's no neutral parties. Either this king is coming for you or he's coming against you. He's either coming to rescue you or to punish you. There's no middle ground. And I often will hear people talk, and I'll hear people say that they're not exactly sure what their relationship with God is like. They're not exactly sure where they're at in their relationship with God. They kind of hope it's good, but they kind of know it's not really what it's supposed to be, and they're not exactly sure. And can I just encourage you, based on God's word, based on Habakkuk chapter 3, that you don't want to think that there is some kind of middle ground. You're either one of God's children or you're one of his enemies. So which one is it for you? Each one of us needs to know that and be sure, because as you've seen in this text, you don't want to fight with this king. You don't want to try to go up against him. So what do you need? Well, in the Colossians chapter 1, it talks about how the Father transfers us from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of his beloved Son. And how do you get transferred? How do you get moved from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light? It's not by being good. It's not by convincing yourself that you're good enough to get into God's kingdom. You get into God's kingdom by asking him to, by crying out to him and saying, please transfer me into the kingdom of your Son. You turn away from your sin, you trust in what Jesus has done for you on the cross, and he transfers you from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. Only God can do that. But you can turn away from your sin and trust in him. So ask him to do that today if you never have. And if you don't take anything else away from this message and away from this text, take away from it that you don't want to face this God on your own. You don't want to be on the wrong side when the king finally steps down onto this planet. So if God is working in your heart this morning, cry out to him in your heart. Ask him to save you. Ask him to transfer you from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light, so that you can know when this king comes, he's coming for you. He's not coming against you. So as we reach this last verse in our text, we reach the application. We've seen that the king is coming for us and that this coming victory is going to be complete. He fights with his creation. He fights against his enemies. But how does that help Habakkuk now? And how does that help us now? Well, let's look at verse 16. He says, I heard, and my inward parts trembled. At the sound, my lips quivered. Decay enters my bones, and in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. So when Habakkuk has this vision of God himself, it has immediate physical results. His body changes. He's not just being dramatic or overstating something. He's describing what it was like when he saw this vision. His inward parts trembled. His lips quivered. His bones felt like they were rotting away. Basically, his whole body was shaking internally and externally. He's seen really the most traumatic, awesome thing that a human being can see. He's seen the warrior king stepping down out of heaven, every element of creation at his disposal, every one of his enemies destroyed, every one of his people rescued. And the human body and the human soul can only take so much. Part of this physical response is because Habakkuk has seen the final end of the wicked. Remember, this book started out with Habakkuk being really worried about the wickedness among his own people, and then he's really worried about the wickedness of the Babylonians. But now God has given him a little peek into the future, and he's seen the final end of people that oppose God. And it's not pretty. It seems like evil is winning. It seems like these people are going to get away with doing whatever they want to do. But when he sees the end, right? When he just sees the wickedness, he's panicking. But now that he sees the actual end, it's pity. The fear about the power of the wicked that he had was gone, because now he's seen the ultimate power of God and how all of it ends up. I remember reading the story of Louis Zamperini, who he was a famous World War II veteran. He was serving in the Pacific and on a bomber, and the plane went down while they were out on a search and rescue mission. And he survived. I didn't look it up how many days it was. It was weeks and weeks at sea without anybody finding them. And then they finally landed on an island. He was captured by the Japanese. And he spent the rest of the war in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. And if you know very much about World War II and about Japanese culture at the time, their prisoner of war camps were the absolute worst. In their culture, they believed that prisoners of war that got captured were not even worse than human or less than human. They believed they were less than animals. They literally would treat animals better than they would treat captured soldiers. And so his story is an incredible one of the things that he endures with starvation and being overworked and tortured and all the horrible things that happened to him. But I remember reading that book, and he describes the process of when they finally find out that America and the Allies had won the war, and they are gathered together and put on a train out of Japan to go to a port where they're going to eventually fly home. And when the train rounded the first corner, they saw a city that had just been completely bombed out. At that point in the war, the Allies had gotten close enough that they were regularly bombing Japan, not just with the atomic bombs that ended the war, but just with regular bombs all the time. And when they saw that first bombed out city, a cheer went up in the train car from all the prisoners. And you can imagine how they felt, right? At that moment, they actually got to see that somebody had been fighting for them. That somebody had actually been working all this time while they were captured and enduring all these horrible things. And so they were excited to see that. But then as they went through the rest of the countryside, they saw bombed out city after bombed out city after bombed out city. And he said that the attitude in the train car just went to a silence, because it turned into pity when they actually saw what had been happening with all of the bombs that had been getting dropped on the Japanese people. And I believe that part of why Habakkuk has this response with the trembling and with the shaking is that he sees the final end of the wicked. And it's not panic anymore. Now it's pity. When he sees the definite, ultimate devastation of what happens to those who reject God and live life on their own. And so now he's gotten his answer. He has seen the awful answer to what happens. So I think that's part of it. The other part of Habakkuk's physical response here is that Habakkuk has seen God. It's interesting that I was thinking about this because every person that has an encounter with the presence of God has a physical reaction. There's no way that you can be in the presence of God and not be changed. Think about it. Jacob wrestles with God and he has his hip put out of joint. Moses sees the glory of God and his face shines like the sun. Remember in Isaiah chapter 6 where Isaiah sees God on his throne, and as a part of that vision, he has a hot coal from the altar that's smashed onto his lips. Remember when Paul meets Jesus on the Damascus road and is knocked off of his horse, he's blinded. He doesn't see anything for days and maybe had vision problems for the rest of his life. Remember in Revelation chapter 1 where John sees this warrior king, Christ himself, and the text says that John fell on his face like he was a dead man. And here in our text, Habakkuk is shaking like a leaf. He feels like he's melting into a puddle. It's an awesome, life-altering experience to be in the presence of this warrior king. So why is it that everyone who comes into the presence of God is permanently scarred, almost maimed for life? You know, a lot of times we haven't really thought about it too much. If anybody said, well, would you like to see God himself? I think most of us would be like, yeah, that sounds good. I'd love to see God. And we know, of course, one day ultimately we're going to see God. But I'm saying in this flesh. But then you look at the people who actually saw God, and it was not a pleasant experience in one sense, right? Do we want Paul's blindness or Isaiah's blistered lips or Jacob's limp? Because to be in the presence of God makes you undone. We might say today, it messes you up. You don't come out the same. If anyone is ever trying to tell you that you can know and be in the presence of the living God and still keep your whole self, they're probably selling you something. They haven't maybe encountered what happened to Jacob and Isaiah and Moses and Paul and Habakkuk in the scriptures. Because meeting with God is going to mess you up. It's not going to be pretty. It may be painful. There's going to be scars and there's going to be limps because there are chunks of you that have to go. You even see this in the New Testament. Jesus walks up to his followers and tells them, you want to follow me, leave everything you're doing behind. Your whole identity of what you do for a job, your whole livelihood of how you make money, amputate that right off and just come and follow me. And Jesus says, anyone wants to follow me, come follow me, but just understand you need to take up your cross and follow me. So then comes the question, why do you want to follow God? Do you really want to be in his presence if it is this painful, if it is this scary, if it is going to leave you walking with a limp or carrying scars? Well, you do need to count the cost. And again, anybody who tells you that following this king is easy and there's nothing to it, I think they're trying to sell you something. Like C.S. Lewis said, we have a king who's good, but he's not safe. But what's the alternative? Do you want to meet this king in battle? Do you want to be on the wrong side when he steps down onto this earth to bring punishment for everyone who has been opposing him? We see this terrible scene of this warrior king stepping down to thresh the nations, to punish the world for its rejection of him. And you don't want to be on that side. So maybe, and I don't know if this is putting it a little crudely, but God either messes you up in this life or he messes you up in the next life. Either God takes chunks of you now and rearranges you in this life so that you can be whole for eternity, or you spend this life wishing for wholeness that never comes and you are crushed by him for all eternity. In the end, every knee bows to him. Whether it's under the earth, permanently separated from him, or whether it's above the earth and those that have already been bowing to him and will continue to bow to him for all eternity. But you're broken either way. The king is coming. He's coming for you. And he's coming either to save you or to punish you. So either this king comes fighting for you or he comes fighting against you. Every single one of us will one day be in his presence. And in that moment, you will either be in his presence as his enemy or you will be in his presence as his child. Those are the only two options. Maybe we never really say it out loud, and maybe we never really formulate the thought fully, but I think all of us know that to commit to follow God and to be in the presence of this God is going to cost us something. It is going to take a chunk of us away. God has some major remodeling that he has to do on us. And it's possible that for some of you here, that's the reason why you're not a Christian. Because you really are afraid that when you commit to follow God, that he's going to take that one thing away from you that you really wanted, that you don't think you can give up. But let me just plead with you, if you're in that case this morning, see the joy and the beauty of letting God work in your life now and submitting to him now, rather than trying to challenge him. Stop fighting him, right? Stop resisting to him and admit that you need him and admit that he is the only one who can rescue you, and begin to live a whole new life where you know that all that punishment that you deserved was actually put on Christ. Because the king is coming. And don't leave here this morning not sure whether or not he's coming for you or he's coming against you. The next time that we're together in this text, we're going to get into the last verses of Habakkuk and see this peace and joy that the book of Habakkuk ends with. But let me just close by encouraging all of us as believers that there is a rest in knowing that the king is coming for you. John Calvin says in his commentary on this verse, he says, "There is no way of obtaining rest except for a time we tremble within ourselves. That is, except God's judgment awakens us, yea, and reduces us to almost nothing." There is something that is peaceful and restful in knowing that God is coming for us and that God is working in all of these things that are happening in our life. We know that we're not going to see God physically because now we have God's word, but you're going to see God in his word when you open up the Bible and as you talk to him. And then that is preparation for the day that you will see God face to face one day when you die. There's a rest that's here for us in resting in this all-powerful, majestic God that is coming. I want to just say a word for a second to the young people that are here this morning. We've got a good number of teenagers and young people that are with us, and I appreciate you listening so well. But can I just make a simple point to you from these verses, guys? These verses are about Habakkuk meeting God for himself, right? Habakkuk didn't hear these things about God. Habakkuk didn't, these aren't things that Habakkuk's parents told him about, or that even Habakkuk, went to church, we would say, and heard about. This is an account in Habakkuk of a man who dealt with God for himself. He had questions about God, and so he went to God with those questions. He had fears and worries, so he went to God with those fears and worries. He was concerned about the future, so he went to God with those things. And I just want to encourage all of you young people to get to know God for yourself. Talk to him. You have a chance to read the Bible each day in your homes. Read your Bible and find out what this God is like. And be prepared that God is going to change you. God is going to remake you. God isn't going to leave you the same. Part of the way I think we kind of start to look at each other and even to look at the church is the church is a place not of perfect Christians. If you have the idea of the church as a place of perfect Christians, you're going to be very disappointed in church. The church, hopefully, is filled with a bunch of Christians who are walking with a limp, right? It's a bunch of Christians that are carrying around scars. And you talk to an older believer, and they will talk to you about the times that they've been in the ring with God and they've lost. Like Job, right? Job got into the ring with God, and it wasn't a pretty picture. But that's what Christian growth is. That's what Christianity is. It's not people who are perfect. It's people that have been broken by the presence of God. It's people that realize that there are chunks of them, big parts of them that needed to change. And it wasn't always pretty, and a lot of times it was painful, but God was remaking them. And God is remaking us for that coming day. Knowing that the King is coming puts everything else in perspective. Once you've seen him for yourself, the idea of his coming is the best possible thing. Nothing gives you rest and joy like knowing that the King is coming for you. So is there bad news coming? Sure, maybe, but the biggest thing is that the King is coming. Things in this life not going how we hoped or how we planned, yes, but the King is coming. Whatever scars he gives us in this life are loving preparation for an eternity of healing. Whatever limps you have in this life are a loving preparation for an eternity of walking with him. Whatever else is coming or might come, we know this, our warrior King is coming for us. And every day we wake up, we have a warrior King that is for us. And so we wait quietly for whatever's coming because we have a King that is coming for us. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this precious, life-changing truth from your word that you are coming for us. We don't know when, we don't know all of how, but we know who you are, and we know that you are coming. Lord, help us to live our lives for that day. Lord, I pray that if there's anybody that's here this morning that doesn't know you, and even though maybe they never realized it or maybe even never thought about it, but they are actually your enemy. They've been living life for themselves. They've been doing what pleases them. Lord, if there's anybody that's like that, that's here this morning, would you work in their hearts? Would you convict them of their sin? And Lord, I pray that that person, whoever they are, would cry out to you and ask you to save them in their heart. They would realize their need to be transferred from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light, so that they never have to face this anger and punishment that is described for us here in this text. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for your promises that we can count on and live our lives on. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.